people are in search of something that will help them feel better, connect with people more deeply, make sense of the world, make sense of the amazingly crazy things that happen that we just never predicted.
Welcome to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'm your host, Maritza Barone. In this show, I will introduce you to ideas, concepts, and mindsets that will open your mind to a new world of well-being and personal life growth. Through eye-opening interviews, we elevate people in the world doing amazing things for humanity and share insights that will shift you to become the happiest, healthiest, kindest, and most compassionate version of you. Today we're going to be having a discussion around awareness of mental health with the use of tools such as mindfulness and meditation and how they're becoming more mainstream in today's society. Addie Wooten joins us in this conversation. She's a clinical psychologist and CEO of Smiling Mind, a non-for-profit organisation whose mission is to provide accessible, lifelong tools to support healthy minds. They have a huge presence in schools and companies and are being used daily by countless teachers and employers globally. Addie joins the team at Smiling Mind after spending most of her career as a clinical psychologist, primarily focusing on supporting people with cancer. Throughout her clinical career, she has seen firsthand the benefits that mindfulness can provide and has used it in her work for many, many years. She's also an experienced researcher and fundraiser and passionate about leaving a large and beneficial impact on the world. Hi, Addie. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Hi, Maritza. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, how are you dealing through these current times around the pandemic at the moment? I always like to ask people that and make sure everyone's doing okay.
Yeah, I'm going well, actually. We've been fortunate to have a really nice space to set up. I've been working from home, obviously, like everybody else. And we've been able to create a really nice way of working and living, actually, which I'm very grateful for. And our organisation, luckily, has been able to pick up all of our programs and projects and make them happen despite not being able to see people face to face. So we're fortunate in lots of regards. It's been strange, obviously. I think everyone feels the uncertainty and the wonderings about what the world will hold in the future. So I think I share that with most people. But yeah, I'm very fortunate to have been able to have quite a good experience during lockdown.
There's definitely been some pros and cons for all of us, haven't there? And hopefully we can try and take some of the pros back into our lives once all of this is over.
Absolutely. I hope everyone is taking this time to learn and reflect and think about what's right for them and how they want to live into the future and work into the future. I know at Smiling Mind, we've done a lot of talking and thinking about what work will look like when the social isolation rules get back to normal, or whatever that looks like, what normal will look like. And I think for me personally, I've also really reflected on the importance of finding the right balance between work and doing other things. So, connecting with friends, making sure I'm exercising and meditating, doing yoga, or, all of those things that I kind of push to the background when I get busy. I think my aspiration is to bring them into the future, but, I'm a human as well. And hopefully I can just remind myself that as I get busier and busier, that I need to keep doing all those things.
So true. I shared a little episode a couple of days ago. It was a bit of a note to myself, in a way where it was going to be a reminder for me in 3 to 6 months' time to look back and remember these times, remember the lessons and the experiences that we've encountered, and not forget them in 6 months' time when life becomes busy and hectic again, and bring that goodness back in and keep it there, because we've gone through this for a reason. Hopefully we don't lose, it's not lost on us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great idea. Maybe we could all write ourselves a letter
Exactly.
to say, yeah, don't forget these things.
Exactly. A voice memo, a letter, a video on your phone, doesn't matter what it is, but yeah, record these moments and remember them and learn from them. So I think mindfulness and meditation have certainly made it into mainstream over the last decade, more so than ever before. Why do you think that is? And how do you think it's benefited society?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I think it's really interesting to look at the way that mindfulness has started to infiltrate and integrate into lots of different mainstream areas of our lives. I think um, we need to give credit to where it came from, and that mindfulness has been a practice that has been around for thousands and thousands of years. And it's probably, since the 1970s that Western world has actually taken the philosophy of mindfulness and brought it into the way that we deliver clinical care and how we think about the world. And it's interesting to see the shift in the Western society from it being seen as a more alternative hippie practice, and now, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, into a much more mainstream practice. I don't know why exactly, but I think some of the factors I think that have influenced the openness and curiosity of the the majority of people has been really that people are in search of something that will help them feel better, connect with people more deeply, make sense of the world, make sense of the amazingly crazy things that happen that we just never predicted would happen, like a global pandemic. So I think people are really hungry for practices that will help them like nourish themselves, but also make sense of the world. And I think mindfulness offers a really accessible framework to do that, that we can actually learn how to look after ourselves, to slow things down, to reset our body and our mind. But then it also gives us a framework to interact with other people and to think about the world a bit differently. I mean, if you think about the simple definition of mindfulness, which John Kabat-Zinn promotes, which is paying attention to the present moment with openness, curiosity, and without judgment. It's a pretty simple thing in a lot of ways, and complex at the same time. So learning how to pay attention to the present moment sounds simple, but we're not very good at it. Learning how to pay attention with openness, curiosity, and without judgment also sounds pretty simple, but again, it's really hard to do and to keep doing it. So yeah, it gives us, I think it's an accessible framework for people to think about how they apply that to their lives and how they cultivate a sense of mindfulness, potentially through meditation practice.
It's been difficult, I think, because our minds and our brains have been trained in other ways, and it's just so hard sometimes to return to that simplicity of the present moment when we're so distracted by so many external things and so many external teachings that we have had. Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to mindfulness versus meditation, I'm a friends with a clinical psychologist, and she said they're two very different things, and they tie in very closely together, but they are in fact different things. You have described mindfulness to us. Can you describe how that differs with meditation?
Yeah, they're two terms that get used interchangeably, and it is very confusing. Different people have different perspectives on it. My perspective is that mindfulness is a state of being that we are trying to cultivate. So, similar to the idea of trying to be fit and healthy, that sense of an overarching way of living, and you can bring mindful awareness or a mindful mindset to everything that you do, whether that is conversations with people, eating a meal, exercising, however, wherever you want to be conscious about what you're doing. Meditation is different, but it's integral to being more mindful. So meditation, in my view, is the practice that helps us cultivate mindfulness. So meditation is the formal practice. So sitting down or lying down or potentially walking. You can do some movement meditations. And focusing your attention, like purposefully focusing your attention on one thing for a period of time, and with the intention of cultivating or strengthening your ability to focus. So meditation could be seen as a mental training exercise, so an activity to focus your mind. And what we find is that through the practice of meditation, you actually become, I suppose it's easier and easier to be more mindful in other areas of your life because you're training your mind to know how to do that. Like you said before, our mind is a thinking machine. It will think all the time. It gets clouded by, lots of different influences, and learning how to focus the mind onto one single point of reference is a really powerful way of strengthening the mind's ability to pay attention. So they go hand in hand. Meditation is the formal practice that helps us cultivate that sense of mindfulness. And then mindfulness is the way that we live our life. And hopefully through meditation, we're more likely to connect with people more openly, to be less judgmental, to be curious about things, to stay focused on what we're doing here and now, rather than thinking about what might be happening in the future or what has happened in the past. And another way of understanding what meditation is like is sort of like gym for the mind. So how if we think, my aspiration is to be a fit and healthy person, I'm gonna go to the gym, or I'm gonna run or do yoga. That's the physical activity that I'm gonna do to be fit and healthy. Meditation is that. So it's the activity that will help us become more mindful. I think it helps people to understand the difference between the two, because we do hear sometimes people say, well, I'm being mindful when I'm running, or I'm a mindful person naturally, and that's, because I'm paying attention to the smells and the things that I can hear. And that's true, that is being mindful. But the formal practice of meditation is actually where most of the science is based on. So when you hear people talk about the benefits of mindfulness, they're often referring to the benefits of meditation, and it might be mindfulness-based meditation.
Well, I'd love to get into the science behind it, because as a clinical psychologist, you probably gravitate towards scientific validation a lot. And like you said earlier, there is this woo-woo-ness around meditation and mindfulness. How do you bridge the gap between that science and that spirituality side?
It's complex, isn't it? And yeah, you're right. As a clinical psych, I definitely am drawn to the science, but I'm also drawn to the human side of the science. So for me, science for science sake hasn't ever been the driver. It's really been for me to understand, well, what can we learn from science and from research that can then be applied back to the real world, and how can we use that to help people navigate challenges, or to work on problems that they're hoping to overcome. So for me, I in my clinical practice and in my role at Smiling Mind, I was always trying to figure out how I simplify science so that people could connect with it and kind of understand how it works. And I think science is really powerful from that point of view, that when we grow up, we don't learn that much about how our brain works, how emotions work, how different triggers can lead to different responses for different people based on our past experience, or our mindset, or our personality. So helping people understand the complex system that our body and our mind is really interesting for me. That you can see sometimes when you explain to people, for example, what the stress response does to our body and how anxiety works, that you can see that there's these light bulbs that go off in the mind that, you're like, oh, I didn't understand that it was actually a physical biological process that actually makes me feel so tight in my chest or upset in my stomach. And helping people understand that physiological process can sometimes really empower them to understand how they can actually help themselves get through it when it does happen. So for me, that's been the driver. We know when people practice mindfulness that that things change in their body, so their brain function is impacted in a positive way, particularly related to that stress response. So mindfulness isn't a cure for stress. We're still going to feel stress and we're still going to experience challenges in our life. But what we do know is that when people practice meditation regularly, the center of the brain that's responsible for the stress response actually responds a bit differently. It's not as reactive. It may not be triggered as quickly as people who don't practice meditation. And that means that there's less stress hormone in your body. So less cortisol, which is that horrible feeling. You might get sick in your tummy, or you might need to go to the toilet or get sweaty palms. We've all had that feeling. And that's the stress response doing its job. So simple things like that, understanding that actually learning how to focus your attention, whilst it sounds simple, actually has a really broad impact on how we navigate our lives. And I think for me, that's a really exciting thing to help people understand.
Absolutely. Well, I know your work as a clinical psychologist. You've seen a lot of people turn to mindfulness and meditation throughout them losing control of what's going on next in their lives due to illness or relationships or loss or even loss of finances. How have you seen this become beneficial in their lives, and how have you seen them use it, integrate it successfully?
Yeah, I think so my first experience of meditation was actually when I was a child. My dad was diagnosed with cancer, and he started to explore meditation. He'd never done it before. He was a pretty normal guy, but he was trying to make sense of what this diagnosis meant for him. So when I was young, I think I might have only been 8. I think when he was first diagnosed, I was exposed to these ideas. And to be honest with you, I was like, oh God, this is a load of crap. I don't want to have anything to do with it. It's too woo-woo. And, as a typical child, I sort of pushed away from what my parents were interested in. So it was interesting to return back to mindfulness and meditation. And I came back to it really as a clinician, working with people with cancer, and you can read into that whatever you want. I'm sure there's definitely something about my childhood experience. I was trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is quite different to mindfulness practice, and there has been some work to bring the two together. But I could see that some of the people that I worked with, whilst they might have been diagnosed and confronted with a very similar physical prognosis, some people really struggled with it, and others thrived in the context of this really challenging period of time. And it was really interesting for me to work with those people, and I was curious to understand, well, what is it that has such an impact on the different ways that people can respond? And I'm sure we all know people that have gone through life-changing events and either really, really struggled, or really struggled and then thrived, or just used the situation to completely change their lives and, rebuild themselves and how they live. So I was really interested, and mindfulness for me helped me make sense of that in some ways, and it gave me a tool to teach to people that were struggling that cognitive behavioral therapy couldn't actually make much difference. It often emotional reactions and how we feel about the world and how we make sense of the world isn't logical. It's not just a thinking process, it's a feeling process, and learning how to sit with those feelings is important in that process. So that's where I return back to mindfulness, that idea that, or that question of, well, how can we sit with such huge life events and make sense of what's going on and still feel like myself, and that I'm connected with the people I love, and that I'm okay, even though the world that I thought was going to continue on may actually be a bit different, or I might have been confronted with dying. So in that context, I started teaching mindfulness. Actually, mostly to, I was working mostly with men, older men. And it was interesting. I was a bit cautious at the start to introduce the idea of mindfulness or meditation because of my fear that they would think it was a bit alternative. But I saw some remarkable ways that these men integrated mindfulness into their lives. And they started exploring guided meditations and sitting with the emotions that came up when they practiced those meditations, and they were able to come back to me and talk to me about that, and help, basically tried to help them make sense of those feelings and how what it meant. And for many of those guys, they actually started a regular practice where they would sit and give themselves some space to confront those feelings. For many of them, they were feelings that like they pushed away for a long time. They thought that they were weak because they didn't think that they should be experiencing those feelings. So it gave them a space to process what was going on and to think about, or I suppose not even necessarily to think about, but to connect with what's important to them and how they wanted to live.
It can be a painful experience, meditating, when you are going through something so significant, can't it? Because you are really sitting there and opening yourself up to that pain and to feeling it, and instead of blanketing it and just covering it up or pushing it under the rug, which a lot of us do in everyday life with so many things. So it can certainly be confronting, but the benefits of doing so far outweigh that slight moment of discomfort that you face.
Yeah, and I think I suppose one caveat there is that if you are going through intense feelings, um, it's probably better not to do that by yourself. It's probably better to reach out and find someone to talk through those feelings and to debrief and to really get that guidance and that sounding board.
Yeah.
Sometimes jumping in to something too quickly can be harder. So having a structure, but yeah, you're right. I think the main aim of mindfulness, really, I from my point of view, or the one benefit of mindfulness is learning how to sit with our feelings and not be fearful of them, to know that they're normal. We're human, we all have them, and the more open you are to those feelings, then the less power those feelings have over us.
Mm. Very, very true. Now, you did talk about when you were an 8-year-old, and that brings me to talking about my children and my 8-year-old in particular, and how Smiling Minds is working with schools and youth at the moment. And I am a big meditator, and I'm a big fan of mindfulness and all of these amazing practices that are so good for our mental health. And I try to integrate them at home and bring them in and show my kids the way forward with these techniques. But like you, one of them is more reluctant than the other. But I think mental health is completely on the rise, especially with the younger generation. And just gauging by a statistic on your website is 75% of all mental illness has its onset before the age of 24. So, I mean, that's a huge number of young people who are dealing with mental issues that we need to address before it becomes a bigger problem later in life. So tell us about how Smiling Minds is doing this and how you're doing it so wonderfully.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a alarming, well, it's a frightening stat, isn't it? That and it speaks to the importance of childhood, I think, in terms of that period of time is where we develop ourselves. It's where skills are formed. It's where routines and patterns are formed. So it's such an important part of life and development. So if we can support kids to learn skills that they can take with them for the rest of their lives, that is amazing. And that's what our goal is through our schools program. We really want to try and support kids to think about mental health in a slightly different way. So rather than thinking that mental health is mental illness, and when we talk about mental health, many of us think about all the bad things. Like we think about the experience of anxiety or depression. And yes, that's a really important part of understanding the spectrum of mental health, but we also need to think about all of the things that we do that protects our mental health, that looks after our mental health. And I'd love kids to have a really healthy relationship with their own mental health, for them to know, what helps them feel good, what helps them manage stress and anxiety, what triggers them in terms of feeling isolated or lonely, and how can they actually support good things that help their mental health. So our goal is around trying to support schools to integrate mindfulness practice into the broader educational community. So how could teachers integrate mindfulness practice into their classroom activities? How can we link it to the curriculum so that some clear educational outcomes are achieved as well? And we know that that's what schools are for, that there's goals in terms of learning. And there are goals around social and emotional learning. So how are we actually helping kids learn about their own emotional world, how they regulate their emotions, how they interact with other people? And mindfulness can give us a framework to help teach kids those skills. And yeah, we run a whole range of different programs for schools, whether that's through our app. We've got I think 180 odd thousand teachers that have subscribed to the app, and they use it in lots of different ways. We have a mindfulness curriculum that primary school teachers can use to teach, actively teach lessons. And then we're really interested to understand what happens when we teach a whole cohort of teachers at a school. Can we inspire the teachers to think about how they're looking after their mental health? And then how does that impact on the modeling that they give to their kids? Because we know that kids learn by observing the people around them, and teachers are pretty influential in their lives. So how do we actually support teachers to think about how they're looking after their own mental health and well-being? And can we actually create or support a mindful school community where parents are part of that, where teachers are part of it, the school leaders are part of it, and of course the students are as well. So yeah, we've got fairly big goals.
I love that. The flow-on effect is so beautiful when you think about it like that, and how it would just continue on through the community and then come through into people's homes as well, because their children are bringing that insight home with them. I know with the homeschooling that we're doing at the moment, Smiling Minds is part of the curriculum that the teachers are sending out. So we are sitting and doing videos together, mindfulness and meditation videos together over this time, sometimes reluctantly from the children, very happily by me. But it does, 1 minute just sitting down and regrouping for children, especially after they're being, on screens the whole day and trying to learn on their own, isolated without friends around them. It can be such a great way to pull them back in and just center them again.
Yeah, and that's the way we find a lot of teachers use our app, that it's a tool. It might be 1 minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes at the start of a class, but it's just a way to help kids regroup and focus. So, we can all remember being out in the school playground, and so many things happen, and it's a whirlwind of emotions. So helping children learn how to come back into the classroom and be ready for learning, rather than thinking about all of the stuff that just happened. It's such a simple practice, but it's a really powerful practice. And to your point about, some kids might not want to do it, and that's okay. I think it's important to remember that we can't force anyone of any age to practice these things. And it really should be by invitation. So if a child isn't really that into it, even if seeing you and your other child or the other classmates participating might just give them an opportunity to be curious about it and think, well maybe there is something in this.
And then
So yeah,
eventually they'll come back to it like you did years down the track.
maybe.
The hope
My
is
mother
there.
was very happy.
I can imagine. Now, you're not only taking it to schools and the youth, you're also taking it to workplaces. How is it working in organisations?
Yeah, we started working in organisations probably about 5 years ago now, and it came about actually through a really nice connection from our schools program. So, someone whose child had been using Smiling Mind at school contacted us and said, "This is really an interesting project. I think it could be really relevant for us in our workplace." And it happened to be that she worked for IBM. And so we started exploring whether we could develop a workplace program for IBM employees in Australia and New Zealand. And that went really well. And from there, we've grown and grown. So we work with lots of different businesses in lots of different ways. But our approach has been very much around trying to demystify mindfulness and trying to introduce mindfulness in a very practical way in the work setting. So we know that their work, especially in a group format, it may not be the right time to delve into deep personal things, but what we do try and focus on is what are the practical approaches that you can consider bringing into your day that will actually help you feel good at work, feel connected at work, feel more productive at work, and also how can we balance work and life? We talk about work-life balance all the time, but actually, how do you actually do that? What's the mental process that you have to go through to actually make a decision about whether you're working on work stuff or home stuff? So yeah, we run training programs in workplaces, and we also have an app-based program that is designed to help people build a routine around mindfulness, and that includes personal practice, but then also team-based practices. So can we encourage teams to practice a brief mindfulness exercise at the start of a meeting, for example, so that just like kids, we come from lots of different busy places. How can we make sure we get the most out of that meeting time by focusing our attention at the start? And lots of businesses have found that that's been really helpful. And it can be literally a 1-minute meditation exercise that actually helps bring focus to the meeting and sets the intention for that meeting. So it's that's going really well. There's lots of different types of, we've worked in, building businesses, construction, we've worked in mining businesses, we've worked in the big banks. It's a program, I think, or a practice that can appeal to anyone, no matter what you do.
I think it can be really beneficial to productivity and results as well, because when you quiet the mind just for a moment, such amazing fresh ideas spring to mind that you wouldn't have otherwise heard if you were head deep in 1,000 emails replying and reacting to life.
Absolutely. I mean, there's this really interesting stat that our notifications on our computer, when that bings, even if we don't click on it or go into that notification, just that noise distracts us enough for us to lose about a minute of our day, which is
our flow.
Ridiculous. Exactly, and our flow. So imagine if you've got that ding constantly going off and your mind is going to that place, you're obviously not being very mindful and you're not in your flow. So just thinking about consciously making decisions about where your mind is and what you're focusing on for that period of time can be a really simple way to boost your productivity and your creativity and your satisfaction with work.
What's the reaction you're getting from industries like the mining or construction industries, where it might be a bit more masculine and manly? Are they open to these techniques, or are they a bit more resistant, have you found?
Yeah, I think they are open. I mean, every individual person is different and everyone responds differently. But yeah, I wasn't sure at first whether, we've run programs with 500 construction workers all together in a big stadium. And I thought, oh, I'm not sure if this is going to go so well. But I think being able to present and talk about mindfulness in a non-woo-woo way, so taking the very alternative myths out of it and presenting some science and some practical tips and advice helps people connect with it. And I think most of us can relate to it. So, we talk about when our mind is not focused and when we're on autopilot, the things that we miss, even just thinking about, eating lunch and our mind is somewhere else, noticing that we've probably finished our food and not even tasted it. Most people can respond to that, or, driving home and pulling up into your driveway and thinking, I have no memory of that drive at all. Most people can resonate with that. So when you can give them those examples and then help them understand, well, the opposite of that is mindfulness. I think, people understand that.
Did you see me nodding furiously then?
I saw you nodding.
I definitely resonated with that. I do that a lot, even though I try to consciously be more mindful in my day. I think a lot of us are guilty of definitely doing that and losing that consciousness and awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a default mode. Our brain just automatically goes into it. So, and it's not necessarily bad. It just means that being more aware that we're doing it gives us an opportunity to change and to decide when we want to be more present.
So finally, as we're going into this new normal that we're about to approach, what advice or what tips can you give people listening today to perhaps maybe three simple things that you can implement straight away to live a more mindful and happier lifestyle?
I think the first is to not wait until you have a problem. I think we're all guilty of putting things off until they become a bit of a problem and then think, oh, I need to do something about this. So taking a proactive approach to looking after your own mental health and well-being is my number one recommendation. Whatever that is for you, it might be meditation, it might be exercise, it might be talking to someone, whatever it is for you. I think try and think about your own mental health in a more positive, proactive way. I would highly encourage your listeners to download the Smiling Mind app if they've never tried meditation before, because it gives a structure and a guide, I suppose, to help people explore mindfulness. And there's lots of different topics that people can explore that might help them understand how mindfulness applies to different areas. There's a sleep program, there's relationship programs, there's family programs. What would be my third piece of advice? I think be kind to yourself. We're all very caught up in the constant doing and the busyness of our lives, and most of us hold ourselves accountable for lots of things, and we have high expectations for ourselves. But I think particularly at the moment with this uncertainty and lots of things changing around us, we do need to be able to give some compassion back to ourselves. And by doing that, it often starts with ourselves before we can give compassion to other people. And we usually do it around the other way. We usually give love to other people and hope that it will come back to us. But I think trying to find how lucky we are to be the people that we are is really important, because I think that will feed into lots of different areas of our lives.
Oh, so true. I mean, what we give ourselves radiates out of us and we end up giving it to other people. I love that concept and I love those tips. They're so simple and easy to use and really integrate into our lives. And if you haven't meditated before, like Addie said, just start, because the benefits are countless and the flow-on effect into the other people around you, whether they're people that you live with or work with, can be incredible. I'm Maritza Barone. Thank you for listening to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'd love to keep the conversation going. Let us know what you thought of this episode, and if something really profound came up for you that you want to share, let's talk about it. You can find me on Instagram at Things You Can't Unhear or on my personal page at Maritza_Barone. And if someone you know will benefit from something that was said in this show, make sure you share it with them too. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and keep up to date with what's next. And if you can spare a few seconds, please rate and review the show on iTunes, just so other people can find us more easily and quickly. And as always, my friends, be happy, be healthy, be conscious, and be kind.